The Where Our Minds Wander podcast may contain sensitive content and explicit language. Listener discretion is advised. Greetings, fellow wanderers, to the places our minds wander.
The house at the end of the dirt road, where disembodied voices whisper and strange sounds make the living shiver.
Where shadows lurk at the edge of the woods, just outside your back door. And mysterious lights speed beyond reason across the clear night sky.
Odd events throughout time that lead you down the rabbit hole.
I'm Wes.
And I'm Beth.
And this is Where Our Minds Wander. Hello and welcome to Where Our Minds Wander, all you fellow wanderers. Thank you for joining us.
Hello, everyone.
Well, after 4 years of doing this show, Beth and I have discovered that quite a few of our episodes that have had anything to do with spiritualism all led back to Sir Arthur Conan Doyle in some sort of way. Well, the same can be said for most of our episodes about the occult. Sooner or later, one name pops up. The wickedest man in the world. The beast 666 himself, Aleister Crowley.
Now, over the years, to be fair, we've given you little tidbits about Crowley here and there, either referencing his involvement in the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn or his relationship with Jack Parsons. We may have even mentioned his alleged tie to the death of Led Zeppelin's drummer, John Bonham.
But we've never taken a closer look at Aleister Crowley himself. And so, for tonight's episode, we thought we'd do just that.
Yes. So, for my half, the first half, I'm going to talk specifically about Crowley. And then in the second half, Wes is going to talk about Boleskine House, which is Crowley's former cursed home on the shores of Loch Ness.
Which is really cool.
It's very cool. So, right off the bat, I want to address that urban legend surrounding the death of Led Zeppelin's drummer, John Bonham, which happened in 1980. Now, legend says that Bonham died in Jimmy Page's house. And that's true, he did. But rumors swirled almost immediately and have endured to this day that the house was once owned by Aleister Crowley, and therefore dark forces must have been involved. The dark force, unfortunately, in this case, was alcoholism. The truth is that Jimmy Page did own several houses, including Crowley's former house, the Boleskine House on the shores of Loch Ness. But Bonham died in Page's Berkshire house, which is in Windsor, England. So I can kind of see how folks might have gotten the two houses confused, since they do both start with the letter B. But it wasn't Crowley's house. However, as I've mentioned twice already, Boleskine House is said to be both cursed and haunted, which Wes will get into in the second half of the episode.
So sit back, and here we go.
Aleister Crowley was born Edward Alexander Crowley on October 12, 1875. He was born into some wealth. His father was the heir of the Crowley's Alton Ales brewing fortune, and although he trained as an engineer, he was able to retire before his son was even born. Father Edward spent most of his adult life as an evangelist for the Plymouth Brethren, a devout form of Christianity. Aleister's father used to read an entire chapter of the Bible to his family every single day after breakfast. And for the first 11 years of his life, Aleister was also incredibly devout. He idolized his father and wanted to please him. Throughout his life, he recalled his father very fondly, calling him his hero and his friend. After the death of Aleister's infant sister in 1880, the Crowley family moved to Surrey. When Aleister was 8, he was sent off to a Christian boarding school in Hastings. From there, he went off to a prep school in Cambridge, run by a priest that Aleister later referred to as a sadist. Aleister's mother, Emily, sounds like she was a pretty interesting lady. She was incredibly devout and was allegedly the very first person to refer to her son as the Beast. He didn't make her very happy. Aleister was devastated by his father's death in 1887, when Aleister was only 11 years old. But it also meant that he inherited a third of his father's vast fortune, and he began misbehaving and breaking rules at school, which he was punished for by that priest. He left the Hastings school after developing kidney problems, and he attended 2 more boarding schools. But at this point, he was starting to take a lot of pleasure out of questioning the Christian faith and wanting clarifications of what he called inconsistencies. He was still a teenager and still very wealthy, so he turned his attention to things that he knew his teachers and his mother would disapprove of, like smoking and having sex with prostitutes. This was too much for his teachers to ignore, so they booted him out. His distraught mother decided her unruly son, the Beast, needed to go live with a Plymouth Brethren tutor in Eastbourne. It was during these years that Aleister developed a keen interest in chess playing, chemistry, writing poetry, and mountain climbing. He was actually a pretty good mountain climber. By 1895, he had successfully climbed Beachy Head and had visited the Alps, where he did some mountaineering with the Scottish Mountaineering Club. Beachy Head, in case you were wondering, is a 531-foot-high chalk sea cliff, the highest one in all of Britain. It was also in 1895 that Aleister became Aleister. He said, quote, "For many years I had loathed being called Alec, partly because of the unpleasant sound and sight of the word, partly because it was the name by which my mother called me. Edward did not seem to suit me, and the diminutives Ted or Ned were even less appropriate. Alexander was too long, and Sandy suggested tow hair and freckles. I had read in some book or other that the most favorable name for becoming famous was one consisting of a dactyl followed by a spondee, as at the end of a hexameter, like Jeremy Taylor. Aleister Crowley fulfilled these conditions, and Aleister is the Gaelic form of Alexander. To adopt it would satisfy my romantic ideals." End quote. It was also in 1895 that Aleister enrolled at Trinity College, Cambridge University. Now, this is kind of a big deal because Trinity College is the largest and wealthiest college at Cambridge, which has existed since 1546, when King Henry VIII ruled England. Sir Isaac Newton went to Trinity College. 32 Nobel Prize winners came out of Trinity College. Aleister Crowley continued to play chess and write poetry. He was actually so good at chess because he practiced for 2 hours every single day that he considered going pro. But he also loved philosophy and English literature, and several of his pieces were published in school publications. He also continued mountain climbing with his friend Oscar Eckenstein, and in 1897, Aleister climbed to the top of Monk, the 13,480-foot-tall peak in the Bernese Alps, and they did it without a guide. A year earlier, despite it being illegal in England at the time, Aleister had his first same-sex encounter, which he regarded as his first mystical experience. In 1897, while still at Cambridge, Trinity College, Aleister began a relationship with Herbert Charles Paulet, who was the president of the Cambridge University Footlights Dramatic Club. Paulet was known for his female impersonations, specifically for his female alter ego, Diane de Rougy. Crowley wrote, quote, "I lived with Paulet as his wife for some 6 months, and he made a poet out of me." End quote. But Paulet wasn't fond of Aleister's interest in the occult, and it became a major conflict in their relationship. Aleister later referred to their breakup as his one lifelong regret. He wrote numerous poems about Paulet, including The Riddle, which is an acrostic spelling out of Paulet's full name. Now, one other thing that happened in 1897 is that Aleister traveled to Russia. Now, remember, he had a lot of money, so traveling all over the world was something that he did a lot of. He said he went to Russia because he was considering a political career, and it was important that he learn to speak Russian. But while he was there, he got really sick, and when he came back home to England, he decided that focusing on the occult and his writing was better for his health. He left Trinity College in 1898 without any degree whatsoever. But according to allthat'sinteresting.com, he had met a chemist named Julian L. Baker, who had a similar interest in alchemy. Baker also just happened to be a member of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. It was a secret esoteric society, and after joining, Aleister was keen to rise through the ranks. He hired Alan Bennett, a senior member, to be his personal tutor, and together they took a lot of drugs tied to various rituals and experimented in ceremonial magic. But because Aleister was bisexual and some of his encounters could only be described as sadistic, some of the higher-ups in the order were not very pleased with him, especially fellow member William Butler Yeats, the poet. The Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn was about practicing magic and gaining knowledge. They felt Aleister was more interested in world domination and dark magic. But he was getting his work published, which was all occult-based writings, as well as erotic poetry, some of which had to be published in other countries due to its racy and, quote, deviant nature. He decided to buy Boleskine House on the shore of Loch Ness, and he fell in love with Scottish culture, even going so far as to wear traditional Highland dress and referring to himself as the Lord of Boleskine. He was in the middle of performing a ritual sanctioned by the Hermetic Order at Boleskine House, in which he summoned the 12 kings and dukes of hell. But before he could banish them like he was supposed to, he got word from MacGregor Matthews, who was one of the order's co-founders, to come to Paris right away. It's said that the kings and dukes of hell have resided in Boleskine House ever since because he never completed the ritual. But Wes will tell you about that after the break. According to mentalfloss.com, the rivalry between Aleister and William Butler Yeats reached a fevered pitch in the year 1900. The order was quite angered by Aleister's continued practice of black magic, drug use, and promiscuity. And when he tried to take over the order in London, Yeats and his supporters fought back. Aleister was prepared. He had gotten several spells from order leader MacGregor Matthews that were supposed to turn Yeats's supporters against him. They apparently didn't work, and when Aleister decided that he was entitled to some of the order's secret papers, he arrived at the London headquarters with magical spells and some very real daggers, determined to take what he wanted. As Aleister tried to go up the stairs at the headquarters, Yeats and some of the other members met him at the top. And I don't know why this makes me laugh, but maybe because it's just so ridiculous. The men started yelling magical spells at each other like a real-life Harry Potter showdown. So I can imagine, he's going up the stairs and they're advancing down the stairs and they're yelling magical spells at each other. Well, this incident is known as the Battle of Blythe Road. And this altercation of spell casting didn't last very long because, quote, "When Crowley came within range, the forces of good struck out with their feet and kicked him downstairs." End quote. Now, fed up with the order's short-sightedness, Aleister believed that dark magic could rule the world, and he didn't understand why the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn didn't get that. So he left the country to travel the world. First, he went to Mexico, where he went back to his old love of mountain climbing and studying John Dee's papers on Enochian invocations. He also became a Freemason, all in Mexico. And then he traveled on to Japan, Hong Kong, and India. And in 1902, he decided that he would climb K2. He and his fellow climbers made it all the way up to 18,600 feet. After this, he returned to Europe, and he settled in Paris for a little while. According to allthat'sinteresting.com, at this point, Aleister immersed himself in the art world, and he became friends with Gerald Kelly and Auguste Rodin. And he even did some painting himself. Most of his paintings used bright colors, and of course, they centered on mysticism. Gerald Kelly introduced Aleister to his sister Rose, who was about to be married. It was a marriage arranged by her family, and when Aleister married her instead, it caused a lifelong rift between him and the painter. Now, Rose was a perfect fit for Aleister. She certainly supported his occultism in a big way, and when the couple honeymooned in Egypt in 1904, Rose fully supported Aleister's newest writing, the Book of the Law. Aleister claimed that while they were in Egypt, Rose had a mystical experience in which she told him that Horus was waiting for him. Then Aleister himself had a mystical experience in which Horus's personal messenger, Aiwass, spoke to him. Aiwass told him to adopt the life motto, "Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law." This saying was actually only 300 years old and attributed to 16th century author Francois Rabelais. But Aleister took it to heart and created a brand new esoteric religion based entirely on that principle, which he called Thelema. In 1905, Aleister was back to mountain climbing, this time on an expedition to Kanchenjunga, the world's third tallest peak in the Himalayas. The expedition included his former expedition partner, the Swiss doctor and photographer Jules Jacot Guillermot, who funded the majority of the climb. So even though Aleister was loaded, his friend paid for the majority of the expedition. There were 3 other men in the kind of central climbing group, including Aleister's hotel innkeeper, an Italian man named Alcesti Cirigo de Rihi. They also had 3 Kashmiri guides and 230 local porters along with them. These porters were barefoot, by the way. By the time the whole group made it to Camp 5, which was at about 20,000 feet, they'd all had enough of Aleister's arrogant leadership, and they began to argue. They ascended another 1,000 feet or so when a small avalanche made them turn back. At this point, the group had totally had enough, and they demanded that Aleister step down as their leader. He refused. And so Jacot Guillermot and de Rihi and the third climber, whose name was Alexis Pache, decided to go back to Camp 3. Another avalanche roared down the mountain, killing 3 of the local porters and Pache. Although they could all hear the frantic cries of the men from Camp 5, Aleister reportedly remained in his tent and refused to help them. He wrote in a letter that he had warned them not to descend and that he had no sympathy for them. When he passed the avalanche site the following day, he didn't say a word to any of the surviving members. Instead, he returned to Darjeeling, where he took all of the remaining funds that were set aside for the climb. Jacot Guillermot was able to get some of the money back after exposing some of Aleister's more pornographic poetry. In 1906, Aleister and Rose's daughter, Lilith, passed away from typhoid. Rose, at this point, was an alcoholic, and Aleister, obviously, was off doing his own thing. However, he firmly blamed Rose for their daughter's death. Despite their strained relationship, they did have a second daughter whom they named Lola. By 1907, Aleister was pouring all of his attention into creating Thelema, and by 1909, he was getting the word out about it in a publication called The Equinox. His divorce from Rose was also finalized in 1909, and she was later committed to an asylum in 1911. Aleister threw himself back into traveling the world, only this time it wasn't for mountain climbing, it was to spread the word about Thelema. But here's where an interesting rumor pops up, one which historians still debate over. Apparently, in these years leading up to World War I, Aleister may or may not have been working as a spy for the British government. Now, it seems unlikely to me that the most hated man in England would be asked to be a spy, but it would also be the perfect cover story. What we do know is that by the time World War I started, Aleister was living not in Europe, but in the United States. There was his Greenwich Village apartment and his Manhattan apartment. There was his cottage in New Hampshire, which he referred to as his magical retirement. But he also lived in New Orleans for a bit, and Esopus Island in New York, which was a small island in the Hudson River, which, by the way, he covered in graffiti. According to Britannica, during his entire time in the United States, he contributed pro-German articles to the German newspaper, The Fatherland. Now, some historians argue that his pro-German stance was just further proof that he was working undercover as a British spy. Others say he was just a Nazi. Regardless, he traveled to Sicily, Italy, by the early 1920s and set up the Abbey of Thelema, where his followers could come and stay. He wrote The Diary of a Drug Fiend and continued practicing various rituals. One ritual in 1923 allegedly involved the drinking of blood from a cat. When one follower, a young man from England, died from cat blood consumption, the Italian government denounced Crowley and evicted him from the country. At this point, his vast wealth was almost completely gone, so Aleister moved back to England. He wrote the Book of Thoth in 1944 and designed a tarot card deck with artist Frida Harris. He also got married again to a woman named Maria Teresa Sanchez, and he continued to promote occultism and Thelema. During World War II, he was friends with Ian Fleming, the spy turned James Bond author, and author Roald Dahl, who also worked in British intelligence during World War II. So, of course, this reignited the rumors that Crowley was also a spy. By the end of his life in 1947, Crowley was living in poverty in a rooming house. He was largely forgotten at this point, at least by the British press, and he was 74 years old. His funeral, dubbed the Black Mass, was not largely attended. But in 1971, Led Zeppelin guitarist Jimmy Page bought Boleskine House, and Crowley's spirit was said to have been reawakened, or at the very least, the dark magic he had practiced in the home was said to still linger in a malevolent way, which my husband will get into after this quick break. Hey, honey, why did the turtle cross the road?
I don't know. Why?
To get to the Shell station. Why did the dinosaur cross the road?
I don't know why, dear.
Because chickens didn't exist yet.
Hey, honey, why did the chicken cross the road?
I don't know. Why?
To get to the loser's house. Knock, knock.
Who's there?
The chicken.
Hey now! The joke, why did the chicken cross the road, may be older than you think. It was first printed in 1847 in the New York publication The Knickerbocker. But historians think that it existed before that and was often used in minstrel shows as anti-humor, which would have made the joke already well known to the general public. So whether you're annoying your friends or your kids with why did the chicken cross the road jokes of any variation, just know that you are contributing to a long history of dad jokes. Who'da thunk it?
All right, we are back from the break. The Boleskine house on the shores of Loch Ness seemed like the perfect home for Aleister Crowley. It was built in the 1760s on allegedly cursed land. The Loch Ness monster lived only a few hundred feet away. There was a cemetery at the bottom of the hill, and the house had a north-facing front door, which was perfect for a summoning ritual that Crowley had been wanting to try for a very long time. The house is pretty cool looking, although I don't really know how to describe it, but I will try to do my best. It's C-shaped and looks like something out of a medieval Tudor-era village, with its smoothed whitewashed exterior and arched windows. Although it has a modern roof on it, you can totally picture it having a thatched roof. It just has that English Tudor cottage vibe to it, although it's way too large to be called a cottage. Anyway, according to the official Boleskine House website, the land was once controlled by the Church of Rome in the 13th century and was the site of a parish church. There was also a graveyard. The parish priests were known for traveling the area on horseback or foot all year round, ministering to their flock. It didn't matter what the weather was or what time of year it was. But for whatever reason, the church at Boleskine was also the center of two very strange rumors. One rumor, or legend, is that during the late 1600s, a wizard came to the area and reanimated several of the corpses buried in the graveyard. Minister Thomas Houston, who lived from 1648 to 1705, was said to have hastily run around all over the graveyard, pushing corpses back into their graves. And then at some point before 1760, while parishioners were attending services inside the church, it caught on fire, trapping everyone inside. The church burnt to the ground. Although it is true that the church burnt down, there doesn't seem to be any truth to the entire congregation perishing inside, or at least the official Boleskine House website. History doesn't mention it at all. Now, sometime during the 1760s, Archibald Campbell Fraser, son of Simon Fraser, commissioned a hunting lodge to be built on the former church site. Now, Simon Fraser was known for changing sides quite a bit during the Jacobite uprisings, and he was later executed for treason at the Tower of London. There is also some speculation that the former church site was used as a military installation or a lookout point during the Jacobite rebellion. And since Simon was considered a traitor, it's also been speculated that Archibald built the hunting lodge there as a way to spite his father, who was buried in the cemetery at the bottom of the hill. Or it could be that Archibald just wanted a hunting lodge and the hill overlooking Loch Ness was just a really beautiful spot. He was a politician who served as the British consul to Tripoli and Algiers, so he wanted a nice place to disappear to and do some hunting. The lodge wasn't finished until 1809, but when it was done, it had 4 bedrooms, a kitchen, servants' quarters, a drawing room, and a library all on one floor. Oddly, though, the house also has a tunnel that leads directly to the graveyard, and historians haven't quite figured out why. Archibald Fraser outlived all of his sons, so the house passed directly to his grandson. It remained in the Fraser family until 1894. I don't know when the story started about the sound of Simon Fraser's decapitated head rolling across the floor, but it has been an enduring ghost story for centuries. Apparently, there have been times when people have claimed that's exactly what they heard: Simon's head rolling back and forth down the halls.
I'm glad we live in a time where most of us don't have any clue what a rolling head would sound like. Like, if I heard a specific noise in an old house, I'm glad that that's not a sound that I'd be able to identify.
I think it would sound something like funk, 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 funk.
I know.
Funk, funk, funk.
As the nose or the ears hit the floor.
Exactly. Aleister Crowley purchased Boleskine House in 1899 for one specific reason. He wanted a place to perform the Abramlin summoning ritual. He had gotten the rituals from the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. Samuel McGregor Matthews, one of the co-founders of the order, had translated the grimoire himself from a French 12-book manuscript written in the 1500s. In a nutshell, it's a grimoire that promises a direct connection to God and is also linked to the Kabbalah. But it also figured heavily into the teachings of the Hermetic Order. The rituals that Crowley wanted to perform could take anywhere from 6 to 18 months to prepare for. A person had to be celibate and alcohol-free for that long before they could even attempt it. One part of the ritual includes summoning the 12 kings and dukes of hell, so that the magician could bind them and remove their negative influence from the person's life. Well, as luck would have it, Crowley summoned the 12 kings and dukes of hell, but before he could complete the ritual, Mathers called him and said he needed to go to Paris if he wanted to advance in the Hermetic Order. This was right around the time that William Butler Yeats wanted Crowley kicked out of the order, so Crowley dropped everything and went to Paris. The 12 kings and dukes of hell were now set free inside Boleskine House. And when Crowley returned, he began referring to himself as Lord of Boleskine and continued his black magic practices. He was quoted as saying, "This house is no ordinary house. It is a mass of legends, some of them dating back centuries, legends mainly of horror. My followers and I are known for plunging into dishes of cocaine, then diving into sadomasochistic activities dedicated to our Lord, God the Devil." Interestingly enough, the effects of the black magic didn't directly affect Crowley, but it did allegedly affect his lodgekeeper, a man named Hugh Gillies. Almost every site that I looked at mentioned that 2 of his children died. And then there was the local butcher who argued with Crowley and then accidentally cut off his own hand with a cleaver. But Crowley sold Boleskine House in 1918 when he could no longer afford it, and it was purchased by Dorothy C. Priestley.
Priestley? That's not ironic as a surname after that, is it?
It's pretty strange, isn't it?
Yeah.
She lived there for almost 2 decades, But after Priestley, the house passed through multiple owners. There were 3 in the next decade alone. Then in 1960, 78-year-old Anna McLaren had a strange premonition. She was the housekeeper at Boleskine, and one day she was out in the garden. She was picking vegetables when she heard a gunshot come from inside the house. She ran inside, but found it completely empty. Exactly 7 days later, the owner of the house, Major Edward Grant, took his own life with a shotgun in Crowley's former bedroom. In one rather macabre version of the story, when Anna discovered the Major, his dog was chewing on a bone that had once been part of his skull. Now, you know that I do my due diligence, and I tried to find anything to prove or disprove the Major Grant story, but I couldn't find any additional details to prove it was true. But I also couldn't find anything saying that it wasn't true.
Hey.
So who knows?
Yeah, it's so part of the lore that, people just take it as truth, but you can't find anything to back it up.
But the 1960s did see several more owners of the house, including a young married couple. Allegedly, the wife was blind and her husband abandoned her alone in the house. And then there was Dennis Henry Lorraine, who bought Boleskine House in 1963 because he wanted a pig farm. Turns out the pig farm was just a front. Dennis Lorraine was a con man who had promised to build several pig farms in Scotland in order to bring 2,000 jobs to the area. He raised massive amounts of money, but instead of building the pig farms, he funneled all the money into his failing Royal Victoria Sausages Company. I'm sorry, I just got to stop right there and say that for any of you people out there that have ever seen Motel Hell, the horror movie, it kind of reminds me of Farmer Vincent's jerky farm.
Human jerky?
Yeah.
Ew.
Where he'd bury people up to their
Heads.
necks, plump them up, then butcher them, make them into beef jerky. The best around. But back to our story. Several celebrities were duped, including George Sanders, who lost a massive amount of money, author Graham Greene, and Charlie Chaplin. The house next went to Halbert Kerr, who turned the rambling house into a guest house from 1967 to 1971. One of his boarders for a summer was filmmaker Kenneth Anger. Anger was a follower of Thelema and a huge Crowley fan. His films centered on homosexual themes mixed with surrealism and components of Thelema. He told a story for years about how he watched a massive painting detach from the wall and then softly float to the ground. Jimmy Page, Led Zeppelin's guitarist, bought the house in 1971. Page was also a huge Crowley fan, and he was pretty excited to own such a big chunk of Crowley history. There are some people who speculate that Page's Zoso symbol on the Led Zeppelin IV album is Thelemic. But Page has always maintained that it is not, but that it represents Saturn in Capricorn. But there's no denying that each band member picked a sigil to represent themselves for that album. In addition, Led Zeppelin III, by far their most famous album, had the phrase, "Do what thou wilt," etched into the dead wax run-out grooves in the UK and US albums. So, that's strange.
It's interesting. Well, he was a huge Crowley fan, so he did that in homage to him. What would people give, what amount of money would people give to still have the albums that have that etched into it?
As much money as they have, probably.
Yeah.
According to Guitar.com, when Page was asked about Boleskine in 1975 by Rolling Stone magazine, he said, quote, "The bad vibes were already there. A man was beheaded there, and sometimes you can hear his head rolling down. Of course, after Crowley, there have been suicides and people carted off to mental hospitals. Now, not to disparage Jimmy Page, but Simon Fraser was beheaded in London, not at Boleskine House. Page didn't actually spend a lot of time at the house himself, but he did ask a handful of friends to look after the place for him, like Malcolm Dent, who lived at Boleskine House for 20 years and raised a family there. Dent said, quote, "Jimmy Page caught me at the time in my life when I wasn't doing a great deal and asked me to come up and run the place. I never did establish why he fixed on me. It was a wreck. It had been more or less abandoned. There had been at least one fire there. Parts of the building were missing, and it had been badly patched up. The grounds, which at one time had been very nicely laid out, were now gone to hell." Dent had all kinds of paranormal experiences in the house. Things like he'd go into his bedroom, close the door, and get in bed. Then he'd hear a strange rumbling sound traveling up and down the hallway outside his room. He'd get up and open the door, and the noise would instantly stop. But when he'd close the door and go lay back down, the rumbling would start right back up again. So it seems that even though Fraser was beheaded in London, his spirit chose to haunt his son's former hunting lodge.
It's Simon's head, honey. Like Simon's cat, but this time it's Simon's head.
You're all too funny.
I know.
Dent also had the terrifying experience of waking up one night to the sound of some sort of wild animal snorting and banging right outside his bedroom door, clawing at the wood. He often referred to that incident as the, quote, "most terrifying night of my life." Now, it probably goes without saying that he definitely didn't get up to go investigate, because he felt like whatever it was, well, it was pure evil. In the morning, there was no sign of any sort of animal having been inside the house. When a friend came to visit and spend a few days, she woke up one night in the middle of being attacked by some sort of devil. Dent also experienced moving furniture like the chair incident. Jimmy Page had purchased several chairs that had each once belonged to someone he admired, including one owned by Aleister Crowley. At some point, he sent the chairs off to be refinished, and when they came back into the house, Dent arranged them around a table with Crowley's chair at the head of the table. Well, apparently, he used to find the chairs rearranged somewhat violently with no explanation. Crowley's chair was never at the head of the table anymore after they had been rearranged. Well, it turns out that during the refinishing, the furniture restorer had accidentally swapped two of the small brass nameplates from the chairs. And it was Crowley's actual chair that was being aggressively placed at the head of the table each time by unseen forces.
That's a cool story.
If it is true, it's definitely spooky.
Yeah, it's a cool story. It's like he was like, I know that's my chair, dude. It belongs over here.
Another issue were the rugs, which would inexplicably be found dragged from their spots in a room and all piled on top of each other. When he wasn't dealing with poltergeists, Dent was dealing with constant trespassers who either wanted to see Aleister Crowley's former house or to meet Jimmy Page. In 1992, Page sold the house to Ronald and Annette McGilvray, who just happened to be descendants of Archibald Fraser, the original hunting lodge owner. The McGilvrays spent decades in the house and claimed to have never had a single paranormal experience while living there. In fact, they refused to even acknowledge that Crowley had ever lived there and called all the dark magic stuff complete rubbish. They put in a lot of time and money to update and fix the house, which they operated as a hotel for many, many years. They were also known for throwing some pretty great parties. After Ronald passed away in 2002, the house was sold to a Dutch couple and their family. They converted Boleskine House back into a single-family residence, which they only used during the holidays. On December 23rd of 2015, the family was out Christmas shopping when a driver on the A82 noticed flames and smoke billowing up from the house. By the time firefighters arrived, 60% of Boleskine House was already gone. They estimated that the flames reached 20 feet high. Now, since most of the house was already lost, they focused on saving the remaining west end. It was determined later that the fire began in the kitchen, which was odd, since nobody had been home for hours. The house was pretty much destroyed and completely uninhabitable. But luckily, it was purchased by the Boleskine House Foundation in July of 2019. The charitable foundation immediately began rebuilding the house exactly as it had been. By the end of that month, another fire broke out. This time, it was believed to be arson. This fire completely destroyed what was left of the house and an outbuilding. Not to be undeterred, the Boleskine House Foundation cleared out all the damage and started all over again, gutting the house completely and then reconstructing it to look how it would have looked throughout its lifetime, beginning with the 1700s. It was completely finished just a few months ago and was opened up to the public. So, whether you believe the Boleskine House is cursed or not, or haunted or not, what a rich history. And whether you're a Crowley fan or a Led Zeppelin fan, or even just a fan of history, it certainly has a lot to offer.
I would love to see it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's
so wouldn't I.
It's on the shore of Loch Ness. So, I mean, if you're going to go to Scotland, you might as well go to Loch Ness, obviously, and to have it right there.
I know, just a few 100 feet away of Nessie.
I know. I'm surprised that, we didn't come across anything about
him trying to conjure Nessie to come up to the shore?
Yes, or his feelings about Nessie.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. He was an interesting character. He was not a nice person. That's for sure.
No. Like you said, he was really interesting. But he was a bit of a kook.
And arrogant and full of himself.
Yeah, he was not.
And not particularly nice.
Somebody you'd want to be around, really.
No.
And why so many people followed him? Well.
And then didn't.
I just can't figure it out.
Right. I mean, he basically lived out the end of his life totally alone.
Nobody came to his funeral.
Very few people came to his funeral.
There's a lot to be said for that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, we have mentioned him in several previous episodes, like our episode about the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn.
He comes up all the time.
And our episode on Jack Parsons, and I think we mentioned him with Led Zeppelin, but he does come up all the time.
Well, if you'd like to know more, as always, check out our sources and our show notes.
Yes, there is a lot more.
And with that said, join us again next week for an all-new episode of Where Our Minds Wander.
See you soon. Thank you for joining us. We look forward to traveling with you again to the places where our minds wander.
If you like what you heard, please take a moment and provide us with a 5-star rating and a comment on your favorite listening platform. It really helps us move up the list and become more visible on the podcast charts so new people can find us.
And thank you all for your continued support.
See you next week for an all-new episode.